They say, we are Muslims fighting jihad in the cause of Allah in furtherance of imposing Islamic law on the entire world. That's what they say. They say it, they write it, they sit calmly and look into a camera before they martyr themselves, and they say, this is why I'm doing it. 100%. We now, our government has told DHS and FBI, you cannot use the words jihad, martyrdom. You can't even talk about the caliphate. You can't talk about shari'ah. Let me tell you, when you can't talk about the very things, you cannot use the words that the enemy uses to define himself, you cannot put your finger on that enemy and you cannot win the war. Not possible. If you all are in here trying to scratch your head saying, but I don't see how they're going to win, that's okay. I'm not even going to argue that they will win. I'm arguing that if you don't oppose an enemy who's well-funded, well-organized, and who has a strategy that they are daily hitting milestones to get to where they're going, if you decide you're going to leave them unopposed, there's no way you don't lose. That's just not possible. And the analogy I would use is it's 3 minutes into the first quarter of the football game. It's 72-0, they're winning, and they're on the field in their football gear, and we are on the sidelines in baseball outfits wondering what inning it is. We are not even in the game. And that's how bad it is. That's what I really want you to hear. We are not, your government is not even engaging the enemy. And now we are at the point where the very agencies that are supposed to be prosecuting people criminally, military is supposed to be going after these guys, and government agencies that are supposed to be making policy, a la State Department, and others to protect this country and its citizens, are now aiding and abetting, and yes, I'm using that phrase, aiding and abetting the enemy directly. Now, whether they're doing it wittingly or unwittingly, I'll leave that to you to figure out. But they're doing it, and that is a fact. And the evidence of that is massive. We could fill up this room with evidence of that. And the evidence you just saw last week is a U.S. Senator stand up and condemn members of Congress for asking for an investigation because the primary advisor to the Secretary of State for the United States, her entire family is Muslim Brotherhood. This is a no-brainer if it's any other group. If her whole family were Chinese spies, she would have never gotten the job. If her whole family were Russian intelligence, she would have never gotten the job. But because they're Muslim Brotherhood, she got the job and nobody seems to care. And as you will hear me say, some of you sitting near me already heard me say, what we're dealing with here is less of a counterterrorism issue than it is a counterintelligence and espionage issue. It's a very different kind of war fighting. And they are very good at it. I argue that this is how we view the whole war, and I'm going to go ahead and say, since the #1 guy for Homeland Security in the Pentagon just said this, right? No. Excuse me, this is our enemy, right? That's it. It's Al-Qaeda. It's just Al-Qaeda, right? Sir, Al-Qaeda. And that we can't use words associated with Islam in any way. Did he not say that? Right. To define this enemy. That, we're going to get to that. What I'm sharing with you is that is the suppression of facts over a narrative, a fantasy, a story about who the real enemy is. It's Al-Qaeda. And the congressman there was asking, well, what does Al-Qaeda believe? Don't they believe in Islamic supremacy? No. We can't even, I'm not even going to answer that question. This is how your government views the threat. Talk to any cop.
Yeah.
Ask them what happens when they get a threat case, and they're getting them all the time, and they're doing good work. Don't get me wrong. The FBI agents on the ground, your DH, they are busting their humps to try to protect your community. Don't mishear me on this. But if they think that this guy over here is planning to blow up a bus, and they do a little investigation, they realize that's not the case, You know what they do with that guy? They close that out and they go to the next one in the stack. Because we are totally focused on the kinetic, the physical violence. People that want to shoot people, blow things up. And what I'm here to get you to hopefully see is that is not how they intend to win this thing. They have no misconceptions that we will win in a kinetic war. Did we crush them on the battlefields in Iraq?
Yes.
Yes. Crush them. Did we come home with victory? No. As a matter of fact, in 2005, our government wrote a constitution in Iraq and Afghanistan that subordinated those constitutions to Sharia, to Islamic law.
That's right.
Thus, the United States created Islamic republics in Afghanistan and Iraq, thereby achieving Al-Qaeda's goals in those regions. Goes back to what I said before. Their entire goal is to get us to do their bidding for them. And I would argue they're getting our leadership to do that at that level, at the international strategic policy level. Boom. That was two big, thick wins in the W column for them. But I would argue this is actually not what it looks like. It looks a little more like this, and this is a little more disturbing. Is Al-Qaeda a threat? Of course they are.
Yep.
And of course, if there's somebody planning to blow up a school, to take hostages, to assassinate somebody, I think we're all hoping that our local, state, and federal authorities will do everything they can to stop it. And from my knowledge of what's going on inside there, from my experiences and the people I still know inside, they are doing that tirelessly. They're working tirelessly. And while we are working tirelessly on that, the enemy seeks to defeat us right here. Right here. And the tippy tip of that spear, the tippy point of this arrow, is the Muslim Brotherhood and the Islamic Movement in the United States. And we're going to talk about that. But we cannot move on until we talk about this. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation. It used to be called the Organization of Islamic Conference, but this sounds a lot nicer, the OIC. How many of you have heard of the OIC? Okay, for those of you at home, we have a handful of, a few people raising their hands. And it really doesn't matter, because as far as I know, that's not your job. But when you go into the State Department and they don't know who the OIC is, that's a bigger problem. Now they have started to figure it out. Here's a question, or maybe here's just a statement. The OIC is the largest international body in the world, second only to the United Nations. It is made up of the 57 Islamic states in the world. 57 states in the world, the OIC. Every Islamic nation, now they consider Palestine one of their states, but every Islamic nation in the world at the head of state and king level, every 3 years comes together. And when they agree on something, it is legally binding for all the states at the head state and king level. Now we're talking international agreements that are binding. And in 1990, they all wrote and signed something called the Cairo Declaration. Now, if you've never heard of that, that's okay. That Assistant Secretaries of State have never heard of it, that's not okay. Because what does that say? The Cairo Declaration says, we, the entire Muslim world at the head of state and king level, subscribe to the Declaration of International Human Rights insofar as it does not contradict Sharia. And we, the entire Muslim world at the head of state and king level, only view human rights through the lens of Sharia and nothing else. You understand what that means? Mm-hmm. Now, in 1993, they served the Cairo Declaration to the United Nations formally. That means since 1993, the entire Western world has been put on notice that the entire Muslim world at the head of state and king level subscribes to spreading Sharia throughout the world. Because the OIC's mission statement, their 10-year statement, and their charter says, we, the entire Muslim world, intend to spread human rights throughout the entire globe. And since they formally defined that phrase, in the United Nations formally served as the imposition of Sharia law, when the Secretary of State or another government official says, well, you know, prior to his death, we're going to take Muammar Gaddafi to the World Court for human rights violations, and you actually took him to court in the the World Court, and we said, you've murdered Christians and non-Muslims without, you know, you just murdered them. So that's a human rights violation. You realize he could legally walk away from that by simply saying, no, actually, I'm a party to the Cairo Declaration, served to the United Nations, saying we only understand human rights as defined under Sharia. Sharia allows us to kill Christians and non-Muslims under these conditions, and it was under these conditions that we killed them. You see how devastating that is, that we have no clue that this is out there? Devastating. Catastrophic failure.
Did you say there were 57 Islamic states?
57 states. Rings a little bell, doesn't it?
Yes.
So, why is this important? Because it's the OIC that formally said that their strategy is to use Islamophobia, remember I mentioned that earlier? Islamophobia as a strategy to shut you up. And what this is, when you hear people say, well, they'll never impose Islamic law in the United States, yeah, there's some court cases and this or that, they have imposed the Islamic law of slander inside the United States at the highest levels. Let me walk you through that just momentarily, because I want to get over the Brotherhood, but I want you to let this sink in over the course of the day. The Islamic law of slander says, well, let me back up. What's in Western law, what's slander? Anybody?
Intentional lying, denigrating somebody's character.
Okay, intentional lying, denigrating someone's character, and what has to be for you to be able to successfully sue somebody, what has to be one of the elements? They have to suffer some kind of damage or loss, correct? Nicely done. For those of you at home, by a Marine. So, thank you. Here's why this is important in Islamic law. So the two things in Western law, it has to be a lie. So that means, for those of you who live in the political correct world, a lie is something that's not true. It's not a fact. And it has to cause damage that can be measured. Fair? Those are the legal standards. In Islamic law, it's that you say something about a Muslim that he would not like. So if you drew a cartoon, you've now actually violated more than just that law, because you made an image of Muhammad. And so the penalty for that is, for slander in Islam, is
death.
It's death. Isn't it interesting that you all know that? And yet we're taught that there are no absolutes in Islamic law. Why is this important? Because Islamophobia from the OIC drives everything we're talking about today. It's why we're here and not at FBI headquarters getting this brief.
Is that considered more sedition to the Islamic State according to Islam?
What do you mean?
Is it seditious, a seditious act by a person saying that against Islam in the Islamic?
They don't use that word. It's slander. So the question was, is that sedition under Islamic law? No. In Islamic law, slander is to say anything. So you cannot say anything about the Prophet, about Allah, about Islam. You cannot speak, write, intone anything. You cannot even intone that you doubt anything about what Muhammad did or said, because he's the perfect example. We'll get into that when we talk about Islamic law. But I lay this out first because the Islamic law of slander is clear. And the OIC has created a global strategic PR campaign, if you will, that Islamophobia must be halted. And they seek to make criminal charges in the West a reality. So that if you or me or you say something, even if it's factual, like this brief, that upsets somebody, that violates the Islamic law of slander, and it does. And so you need to shut up. So again, let's go back to Senator McCain. It doesn't matter that the facts that those 5 members of Congress wrote in their letter to the Inspector Generals of those different departments about the Muslim Brotherhood penetration inside our government. It doesn't matter that the facts are true. It just matters that they said them.